Income inequality.
Especially since after the financial crisis. And looking this up, I was actually encouraged by some news I found from the New York Times. The New York Times shows that inequality among the rich is lower now than it was before the financial crisis. And I think partially that's because inequality among the uber rich went up to outrageous highs before the financial crisis, and thankfully it has come down a little bit.
So income inequality within the top 1% has come down a bit.
Has come down
right.
since 2007.
It's not that
right.
the 99% of the 0.1% got richer.
Hey, we're talking about the 1% here,
Yeah,
Scott.
The 99% of the 1%. My bad.
No,
It's not that they got richer. It's that
we're talking about the 0.99%.
It's that the 1% of the point. Oh fuck. Whatever. I'm just saying. Is it because it's because people lost money, or because other people gained money?
There's a nice chart.
Did the super rich get
from 2007 to 2013, and the bottom 90% of income earners had their change in income go down like the least, and the people who have had their income drop the most since 2007 is the top 0.01%.
Oh my god.
So
dude,
actually,
I feel bad now.
No, I feel great. No, I feel great. This is actually good news.
Say that again. So you're saying that the people who have lost the most amount of income are the 1%?
Yes, absolutely. The uber rich, but this is since 2007. Now, if we look at the long span of American history, we're still at pretty absurd levels of income inequality. But there is some good news.
There was one radical economist who last year called it, the most extreme income inequality in history.
So,
Something like
but what
that.
I'm saying is,
some kind of radical Marxist named like Paul Krugman.
At least we've turned.
Oh my god. I'm a big Paul Krugman fan.
I mean, Mitt Romney's still paying 14% income tax on his bullshit carried interest, right? I mean, capital gains tax are still absurdly low by historical standards. Dividends are absurdly low by historical standards. So there are plenty of ways where we can get more revenue for the government and get more help for middle class families, working middle class.
And that is how you fight income inequality. Republicans all of a sudden all talking about income inequality. You know how one of the main ways you fight that is with taxes. And I mean, you can even see that. Like if you look at if you look at a graph of like the Gini coefficient for the U.S. across the last 40 years, you'll see that it shows pre-tax income and after-tax income. And after-tax income is always considerably lower because the income inequality is always considerably lower. Always. It's because taxes reduce inequality. I mean, if you do it in any sane way, because it has to. Because who else are you going to tax other than who's got the money?
That's we'll talk about inequality. You look at inequality in the tax system. A
lot of economists would agree we're currently living through the second Gilded Age, and something that's a little bothersome about that is that if you look at the first Gilded Age, the first Gilded Age was brought to an end largely by accident through the Great Depression. And then because the economy eventually came back with World War II, when there were price controls and wage controls, it ensured that income inequality didn't come back. And as long as the country continued to have high taxes on the rich, including taxes that were as high as 90% during the 50s and 1960s, income inequality wasn't really able to come back for the most part. But then, of course, Ronald Reagan, who's largely considered to have launched us into the second Gilded Age, reduced taxes on the rich from 70% to 28% in 6 years. And the dynamic has changed ever since then. Wealth inequality has surged back to the levels of the Gilded Age, as have income inequality levels.
You know what? I think the real root cause is not the Gipper, but early 70s, businesses started realizing that, after a lot of regulations, the EPA was created. Even from Nixon, the business was being cramped by government, and it realized it, and so it made a coordinated effort to move all its headquarters from New York to DC and make sure that's where their public affairs offices were. So and it started in the early 70s. By the late 70s, they had a lot of control and were using the union's playbook against them, but with a lot more money and with a lot more money in return, and so that gave them a lot more power. And so the plutocracy fed into itself in this positive feedback cycle that just accelerated. And Reagan was a product of it, and everything we've seen is a product of it, including Obama. That's why it took him $1 billion to So
If-
I mean,
if
it's
you
all
look at
you can't separate plutocracy from income inequality. I don't think. I
Scott.
don't think we can deal with it till we get money out of politics.
Scott, if you look
That's
at the
it.
change in income inequality and the structure of income from the 1970s to now, overwhelmingly what is leading that change is capital income, which has been caused by the wealth accumulation among the rich, which has been allowed by Ronald Reagan lowering taxes so much on the rich.
And George Bush.
Yeah, but you can't act like Ronald Reagan just popped out from space. He came from the political climate that was
That's right.
created by
True.
what I'm talking about, by all the dynamics. I mean, and this is the larger political climate, and it affects. It's the same thing in 1,000 ways. That's not just that one tax. That like there's so many things that feed into it. I mean,
All right,
I wanna
I
give
see your
everything
point.
from
I wanna give it
education-
that.
but I mean, you're right. But I think that's a symptom of the problem.
Everything from education and other issues feed into income inequality. The thing is, for me, is that I think a lot of times we divide about this issue about how we should treat the rich. The conservative individuals tend to view them as being successful by their own merits, and many progressive-minded individuals see them as needing to give back and contribute to a larger society. The thing is for me is that I think the focus needs to be on building up both the working class and the middle class, the poor, the working class, the middle class, and the decline of unions, issues like that have contributed to that. Trade policy, low minimum wages, in the sense of the fact that wages for lower and working class and middle class Americans are not, or just barely, or are not keeping up with inflation of about 2% a year, even though while the upper class incomes has skyrocketed. I don't necessarily care as much about recouping wealth from the rich, or
You have to.
You do to
You
some
have
extent.
to. That's why it's so extreme, is because it's so inherited. It just keeps. Well, I mean,
But we need
sound so
we need to
entitled,
be we need to be working towards policies and legislation. As I mentioned, higher minimum wages, changes in tax policy for the middle class, better jobs, changes in trade policy, and those type of issues, so that the wages for the middle and working class increase, and their general prosperity increases, and that's the priority. That's why from about 1940 to 1970.
So what the hell are we gonna do?
I think that's more important than taxing. I think if we had to choose between
what's
taxing the rich at a higher percentage or increasing the minimum wage or increasing wage period, I would rather have
That's
increased
I
wage.
think Steen and Bridgemont are far too soft on income inequality,
both
and
of
raising
them.
the minimum wage is not what's going to bring a strong middle class back, because the middle class isn't operating on the minimum
I'm
wage.
not talking about wages period.
No, it's
all
wages period. Yeah, the
Wages
wage
period.
pool.
Wages
But
period.
Yeah, but unless you're actually planning on coming in and introducing introducing wage floors, which we've never really done.
Isn't that
for
what a
as
minimum
long
wage
as-
is?
I would look. I would,
Yeah.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Hold on. Are we talking about a minimum wage, or are you talking about
right.
wage floors all across every single different industry?
I would look at guaranteed minimum income. How about that? How about we say every American citizen that lives in this country is going to get a certain stipend, similar to Social Security like we have now, but it guaranteed is what MLK wanted to do, for that matter.
Here's my
As
problem.
long as people work,
all
right?
these things
No,
are
it's
just
guaranteed
talking
if
about
you're-
how do we make sure that people who are on the very bottom of society have just enough to make it by.
No,
and I think that
That's not what I'm saying.
That's
I'm
not what
talking
I'm
about
saying.
building the middle class.
Yeah, we're talking
Okay,
about
then
the middle
what are we
class.
going to do to build the middle class? Because you two seem soft to me right now.
Trade,
Well,
trade policies.
Oh, the neoliberal.
What up,
You
what
guys-
up?
Oh man.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm all for building the middle class, because I believe that the only way that in America you could be born poor and become rich is, first of all, you have to go through the middle class.
That's right.
And if if you can generate wealth and then you can make investments, then you can succeed and become a titan of industry.
That's
right.
But if you're not given the chance to, if first of all, you got to look at cost of living. That's what and we're not talking about because
That's right.
a wage in
Example.
Georgia and a wage in California, it might be the
Example of
same.
cost of
It might be
living.
the same, but the cost of living is so distant that you
Example of
can't.
just recent statistic.
Cost
about
of
the
living
cost
is
of living.
higher in urban areas. I don't know what that says beyond.
They did
No,
a study recently about how much it costs to buy a home, like a normal family home in different major cities, Atlanta, San Francisco, etc. And the cost varies from like $28,000 a year, and which your salary had to be in order to afford a home. It was like
Right.
$28,000 a year in Cincinnati, and $162,000 a year in San Francisco.
And why do you think that is?
Because the cost of housing and the availability and the type of demographic that lives there is much different in San Francisco
Yeah, I
than
mean,
it is in Cincinnati.
property prices are determined by supply and demand.
That's right.
So you're going to have urban areas are going to be more expensive. But here's the deal. I still think you guys are being too soft. Bridgemont, you said we got to build the middle class, but that to me doesn't say anything. Right now, we've got older Americans are struggling to save enough for retirement.
Increase
Young
Social
Americans
Security
who
and
aren't from
expand
wealthy
it.
families are being buried in student loans, and the wealth base of most Americans was obliterated during the housing crash.
That's right.
And I just don't
So
hear
here- so
any real
here's-
solutions from
Here's
you
the
guys.
solution.
Well, Bridgemont's got 2 jobs.
Yeah, so, and that's the thing. You have to, make your own way somehow, some way.
Yeah,
I mean, like I
that's
said
right.
before, I believe that everybody
Is
should
that
have.
so? All right.
Should have some type
Let
of
me break this up.
legitimate
Now.
own
Let me break
business.
this up because we all met through Occupy, so we pretty much agree on this. But so what I want to say is, since we met, fucking hundreds of people were in the streets. This shit was an issue. Like, there was, I foresaw that there could be real change on like this issue and then banking and everything. But obviously that hasn't happened. So
You know why? You know what it is? People aren't outraged anymore because things have gotten better overall. But, the same problems that got us into the financial crisis still
right.
exist. But people are not, they don't feel
That's
the
right.
impact anymore. It's like, okay, Obama's getting the economy together. I have 2 jobs. So, it's not a problem anymore. And people lose focus because, overall, the goal was to change the economic and political structure, which had not happened. We failed at that.
That's right.
It's an ongoing fight, but many people left that movement because they got better. Their lot in life was better. So many people were drawn to Occupy because something happened to them.
That's right.
It was a real impact.
It took a very severe risk to people's living standards to get them out into the streets and the complacent society we have where people watch TV mindlessly. Right. And the solution to this income inequality, going back to the issue, is this. You need to, at the upper level, crack down on the tax cheats, the offshore accounts, all that kind of stuff. I'm not supposed to even raise the rates, but at least crack down on the corruption that goes on, the manipulation, all that type of thing.
Because that's going to happen regardless of what the tax rate is.
The fact that GE pays 0%, it doesn't matter what the corporate tax rate is. Let's at least get our companies to pay it and pay so in an upright way. But in terms of middle class and working class policies, again, higher minimum wage, debt forgiveness on student loans, single payer health care.
And that shit's not going to happen as long as we got a plutocratic
I mean,
government. Unless we fight like hell for it for years on every single issue.
These are the solutions.
That's like why we're slowly raising the middle wages, because people have been in the streets for 5 straight years.
Widespread expansion of broadband internet. I could go on and on, but the point is there's a bunch of policies we could have. And if you ask about how we afford them, it's very simple. Cut the military budget. Get out of these wars. Get rid of Medicare Part D. Get rid of all these oil subsidies, all this type of thing. And we would have all the money that we would need in order to implement these programs. We could afford to send everybody to college if they wanted to and if they were qualified to do so for free. For about 1/10 of the cost we spent in Afghanistan.
Yeah, we have the money now.
We can do that. We don't need to raise taxes.
Right.
We don't need to make any severe austerity cuts. We would simply have to leave Afghanistan, and we can afford college education for every American.
Important issues. The special interests cannot control everything, but they will throw most of their weight behind preventing inequality reform. And when it comes to inequality reform, that it's saying things like, oh, if we just went after the tax cheats, or if we just cut military, or cut Medicare Part D, which I don't know where seniors are going to find out how to afford medications if you cut Medicare Part D. But still, those kinds of things, that's not going to be how we fight income inequality successfully. If we want to do it successfully, it means making Social Security's tax and payment system, which is currently regressive, we need to reform it to make it progressive. We've got to reform it anyway in order to make sure it survives, but we should be reforming it to make it progressive. And it means reforming Obamacare subsidies and Obamacare overall, not just defending Obamacare. We've got to stop just defending defending Obamacare and start talking about how to make Obamacare progressive and stronger.
Single
And it finally
payer.
means the
Single
one
payer.
thing. the
Single
one thing,
payer.
No, not single payer, not something that controls prices, but
Oh.
something that is stronger, something more progressive.
There's no
Like,
price control.
Something
If there's no price
No.
control,
look,
That's the problem.
that's the exact problem. That's the
Germany-
problem with the whole healthcare industry. It's price.
Yeah.
Germany does not have a single payer system, and yet they have a
It
progressive
uses
system.
It uses an all-payer, elements of an all-payer
That's
system,
right.
which does have elements of price control, which we
That's
do
right.
need in America.
Right. Well,
We do have-
I
there's price
wouldn't support
controls
going
in
that
about
far,
every
but we
country.
should make it a lot more progressive.
Well,
and
why
finally,
Why do you not support
and
price
finally,
control? Or
and finally, if we're going to keep talking about inequality, the one point where Steen was correct is that this means passing Elizabeth Warren's bill, which failed the Senate by only 2 votes, and this would have raised and it still would have raised the tax, but it would have raised the 5% tax on income for millionaires in order to make college education free
Joey, I'd
in
like
the
to
United States
pose a question
once
to
and
you.
for all.
Something-
Why do you think that hospitals should be allowed to charge me $100 for a cup?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Or, but, I mean, are we seriously going to get into that argument, or are we going
I
to?
think let's
No, we're
that's
not,
not- that's
because
not showing
we
it.
all know your bullshit, Joey. That's why we're not going to get into it.